Hello, and you have reached Beyond. I'm your host, Tiffany Hopkins. We are on Lilydale Radio, and this is a production of Normalized Talking to the Dead. I have a very special guest with me today. Hi, Marcella.
Hello.
This is Marcella Kroll. I am so excited to introduce you to her and her work, and we are going to have a meandering conversation about everything she does, including a new book she has coming out today, February 11th. And with that, I want to start with just a couple questions for you. Marcella, where are you in the world right now?
I am in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
Mhm.
So is it warm-ish
No.
at all? Okay.
We actually
Okay,
have
so cold.
it's notoriously warm and triple digits for months and months and months, but actually we're in just like a nice little cold snap right now.
Okay. Helps me feel what it's like where you
It's
are.
very dry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the opposite of here, but also still cold. And what's
Mhm.
your day look like? What are you up to other than this?
Oh, today I have two students. I'm doing mentorship right now for intuitive development. So I have two students online and then just hang out with my little puggy rescue here and try and work on some art.
Yes, so we
Mhm.
get into it. You're an artist, a writer, you've created tarot decks. Tell us a little bit about your work and how you describe it.
I my work is a little bit of a hodgepodge of things. It's very hard for me to do things. It's like my body shuts down if I don't want to do something. And I used to be really kind of punishing about that with myself. I would feel kind of bad about it. But then I realized like I'm very much an instigator in every aspect of my work, whether it's creating divination decks or doing readings or teaching. I think a big part of the work I do is about getting people to find their inner like spark and make sure that that's the first imprint that they put on the world. And yeah, it's I love the mystical, the magical. I always have. Definitely consider myself a generational medium, and I just feel like the unseen touches every aspect of my life and work. Like it's not something I just, 9 to 5. It's just like in every corner and every facet of what I'm doing, whether it's a painting, a drawing, a reading, a class, it's all connected to the invisible. So that's
Absolutely.
kind of
Well, I should say Marcella's book is called Healing the Liminal, right? And I read it recently, and I was struck by how it is about all of life and
Mm,
how beautifully you weave into everything these ideas of the liminal, of ancestry and lineage, of the unseen and the unknown. So you very actively did that in this book, and it's amazing that this is kind of the first thing you're bringing up. So it is well articulated in your written work. And just for listeners who haven't read it yet, Marcella combines storytelling, and parables with more, I wouldn't quite call it instructional, but there is instructional material
mhm.
and prose about healing the liminal. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that
Yeah.
means to you.
Yeah. So the concept of this book, it actually started with a class offering. I wanted to teach it as kind of a class, and I did that a couple of times a couple of years ago. And particularly for people who, you know, don't really feel like they belong and where do they go? I'm someone who I think lives a very liminal existence. I'm multiracial, I'm autistic, um, I'm a medium. I mean, I've had multiple near death experiences. I've never felt like I was part of any particular place, or when I would try to insert myself, it either felt there's a lot of discomfort, or you don't belong, or it felt appropriative. And for me, a big part of my own healing journey was like, well, how do I do this and still honor all of these spaces and places and where I reside? Because, there's I did a book like in 2015 called Priestess, and it was basically an illustrated grimoire of all of my notebooks. And I dedicated it to the Edgewalkers. And why I kind of termed that was because I felt like there was this kind of just place that didn't exist on the fringes. It existed and it didn't exist for people who floated in and out of places. And it's like, how do we ground? How do we heal our own? How do we honor and show reverence? And that's kind of where the class came from. And that's the whole premise of the book, was like, just because you float in and out of these spaces doesn't mean you have no right to exist, because there is this element of like, haunt the spaces, like be seen but not heard. And there can be a lot of things that come up that are challenging in so many ways with that. And I wanted to use all my, I guess I would say, abilities, or my tools in creating this book. So the stories and the parables, particularly the ancestor stories, I mean, they're all channeled. So I mean, I was waking up. The first story I wrote in the book, it was a past life experience. And I wrote it actually on the Nile when I was in Egypt. And that's how the concept of how to write this book came in, because I like literally channeled the story. And then when I came back to the States, I would wake up at like 3, 4, 5 in the morning, because I was still on Egyptian, like the time change or whatever. And I would just like record myself channeling story. I was like, who am I writing about today? And be like, okay, it's your grandfather or this one, and telling it through their lens of perspective, but then also wanting to share like how to make an altar, how to show reverence, how to kind of find care for yourself when the communities you're supposed to be able to, find that they don't exist for you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a lot rolled into one, but I could never find anything that I felt I had connection to, like in terms of books or literature or even classes. Everything's very outlined to cater to a certain thing, but like in the different communities, it was like nothing ever quite fit or felt right. So that's why I wanted to offer this. I wanted to offer people a starting point that they could start somewhere and not feel defeated or like, what's the point? Why do I bother? And then feel more erasure of who they are. So,
yeah. And I really felt like it did that. I also consider myself a kind of liminal person. I think anyone who has these experiences that makes your physical world feel liminal makes us, I don't know, somehow more connected with the other worlds, because maybe we get lost in between in the physical spaces and we just end up there. Yeah. I don't know, but bringing those two things together, that physical liminality and like not fitting in, going between all these spaces all the time, and the experience of being outside of physical space, bringing those together for me was really unique. And I don't feel like people talk about that very much. And I think we should talk about that.
I think there's more to it, or more people that relate to it than maybe we hear about. But I think that's also because of lack of information, because it's there's a lot of invalidation. Like, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of masking to fit in. And I think that this kind of conversation is going to become more prominent as people become more connected to not fitting in as a mean, and not as a means of separation, but as a means of finding connection. So yeah, we will see more of this talked about, but I think it's only because, and I honestly, it was like, I have to make this book. I have to make this book. It's not just about me making it for me. It's about like, and again, with all of the work that I do, I always feel like I have to kickstart things. I may not see them all the way through, and I might not be the one to take the helm, but even in my work, like doing readings like early on and being really public, and people weren't really doing that. And then, I just think like there is an element of starting the change in the physical reality of what's already happening in the etheric. So if that's just what I'm doing here, then that's just what I'm doing. And I think this book is part of that for sure.
Absolutely. And I also think about like the meta between that's happening in the book, because you have parables, which are somehow like the most fictional of all fiction while being true, right? And then you have classic how-to nonfiction that's like step by step how to do something. And then this in-between part that has a lot about you. There's almost some memoir elements, but also kind of this higher level understanding of what's going on in these worlds. And you blend it all kind of together. And I feel like it really is 4, maybe 5 different ways of showing people what you're saying. And I'm curious if you've written like that before, or was that part of your process? How'd you figure out how to put all those different types of communications together?
I don't know if I ever figured it out. I think it's just always the way I've communicated. And I do think, a big part of what's lost in modern society is storytelling. And I think I've always seen things in such a way that, like, even though, yes, like maybe some of these things feel like fiction or supernatural or sci-fi, but they're very real to me. Yeah. Like they're very real in my world, And I will say there are a couple of the stories in there that are about me that I've changed the name, but I could never put them as they're my story. And I only say that because some people, they wouldn't believe it. They'd be like, oh, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And I'm like, actually, it really did. It really did happen, but I can't, it's better for me to distance myself, the human, 3-dimensional person from it, so that you actually can let yourself go into the story and feel the emotion and feel the weird, mysticism of it. But I guess it's all, I think it's just always been the way I've communicated. And I think that comes from also being a liminal person and learning how to learn everyone else's language to fit in.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's just like this hybrid of learning different ways to communicate with people so I can feel heard or understood, or, and I've spent most of my life learning more about how other people communicate than how I actually communicate. And it was survival and fitting in. And then, as things started to, shift and change, as I changed, as I've started to go through certain levels of unmasking or learning things about myself, I had to learn how to recommunicate with even myself. So
yeah,
it's a trip.
It is. You're reminding me, I'm taking this songwriting class with Brian Eno.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I know, right? First off, yes, amazing. It's unreal. Technology is awful, but also amazing for stuff like this. And he was telling a story in our first class about David Bowie and how David Bowie came in from a take on a song and was like, I'm going to butcher the exacts here, but he's like, that sounded like a chainsaw or like a woodsman, and it needs to sound like a gardener. And it was this realization that Brian Eno had, that even with music or with any art, you go in and you play this role when you're articulating something, a piece, and that when you kind of fully give yourself to that role you're playing, whatever it is in whatever moment, that's when you're able to kind of make your art. And I had never thought about it in music, and that was sort of the context Brian, was giving it in as well. But I've been thinking about a lot with writing because it's really, the genres are just so blurred, and it's really weird having to be like, every part of this is one me, and I have to cram it all together. And I love this. What I feel like you did is create space for yourself to be in and show these different, beings and artworks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was really, there's something to be said about allowing your multidimensionality to show in what you do. And I think as a society, we're just so rigid and regimented to have like only one expression be filtered through one lens. And it's like, okay, that's all I can do. I'm like, well, that's not humanity, and that's not how I exist. I'm not just one way, and I think I'm even going through, and I'm going through that right now. And some people in my, growing up would be like, well, you're lost. You don't know who you are. You're having an identity crisis because I didn't pick one thing. And when I look at it now, I'm like, no, it's because I literally am a living expression. And I want to have a creative existence, which means I have to constantly be exploring and evolving. Like, I don't get the rigidity of being in one place for so long. That works for some people, and that's great. But when I do it, I wither and die. My spirit dies. And that's a really hard thing to explain to some people. And the other thing I think that's really hard as an artist, especially too, is because people will praise your work. But when you're going through the transformation process, they kind of get like, ugh, they get a little uncomfortable. They get uncomfortable with you switching it up, or they don't see the value in it until later, or until they find something that they relate to within it. But yeah, I don't know. I just think there's so many different parts and expressions. Like, why can we, some people would see it as like, oh, well, that's complicated and not linear and messy. Whereas other people could say like, oh, that's really expressive and, allowing yourself to get out of your comfort zone. I appreciate anyone who can hone in on something and really master that kind of the technique or or like their expression. But I just don't think that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. And there's more than one way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about how you approach lineage and ancestry. And I feel like it's very much like that. Like, I think a lot of times people get stuck in extremely limited understanding of what lineage is and what ancestry is. And you take a broader and more poetic maybe approach. And I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about how you think about that. And you also, I really appreciated your approach to sharing your arc of your relationship building with your ancestors. I do feel like you're a little ahead of the curve in that too.
Well, I think it's like, it's when, especially again, like I didn't know a lot of my ancestry for a time because I didn't know my biological father, who they were, until I was 42. And there was always these like missing pieces and longing and feeling of not understanding like why I felt different from the relatives I grew up with, or why I was chastised, or there, and a lot of my searching, I took it upon myself, like reaching out, doing like trying to find, doing tests with random men that I thought might be my dad, like hunting down kind of like the facts, the information. And because I would walk into spaces and they'd be like, well, you don't belong here. And then I walk in other spaces and be like, but you don't belong here. And there's something about just the goal of self. I don't know, like even I tell people all the time, like people are like, how did you get into tarot and astrology and all this stuff? And I'm like, because when I was 18, I overdosed, and it wasn't about being altruistic. It was about, I don't want to come back. I don't want to do this again. I want to know, why am I like this? And how does this benefit any of the world around me? It sounds really dark. I mean, it kind of was really dark space in my head for a long time of just like, why. I just want to know why, like why we're here and why we're doing this. Like, and why we, meaning like my own spirit. And like, there was always this part of me that felt really like, why am I here again? And I think on a soul level, I was like, why the hell did I come back here again? And like really wanting to unpeel all those layers away. And through that, it turned into being like, oh, wow. Like I started connecting with people who had similar things and realizing that I could help them shine a light on it and be like, and that's again with this book and anything I do is like, I just want to be the person that I wish was there for me, because I had no mentors. I had no one I could talk to or felt safe to talk to. So if I can provide a little bit of light, of comfort, in helping someone who does have like a really unique, beautiful purpose, and if that can help alleviate some pressure or uplift them to continue to keep going, then I've done what I'm supposed to do. And I guess like, I don't know, just like the whole ancestry thing, I've had such conflict because I've come from so many different places, but also people who are notoriously in conflict with each other, you know? And I didn't understand that inner battle because I didn't have the tools, meaning like I didn't have the paperwork, the like the history lesson, because a lot of, my ancestors on one side are, I have a lot of like West African slavery ancestry, Wampanoag ancestry, indigenous ancestry. I have Filipino, Visayan specifically ancestry, who were the first to meet the Spanish. And then on the other side, I have like Italian and Portuguese. And, like there's just like this conflict of people who are constantly in battle. And that's happening all inside of me. But I didn't know that that's what it was. So learning, I was like, I need to get to know these people, even if I don't know them, and that's why I shared some of the practices in the book, like the ancestor tree. Like that ancestor tree, I using my creative skills, because I was just like, how do I do this? I don't know these people. So I drew out this tree and I decided, you know what? I'm just going to put my name. I'll write the names of some of the people I know from my mom's side. And then all throughout the tree, I just wrote ancestor, 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 because I knew I was reaching out to someone. I just didn't know their names at the time. Mm-hmm. And in doing that and setting that up and making an altar of reverence, I was able to, all of a sudden, I had all these people contacting me and they're like, who are you? Who are you? And there's like 12 of them and they're all Black or brown or indigenous. And they're like, and they all have the same last name. And I'm like, you tell me, who am I? I'm related to you. And then that started this wheel and this spiral. And then so I was like, okay, I can trust my creative process. Mm-hmm. I can trust my intuition, because even if it doesn't make sense, I'm going to follow that. And that led me to these cousins, which led me to an auntie, which led me to my biological father. Wow. And I think, so there's this like learning to trust our intuition, not just the logical skills, but learning how to meld them together. Yeah. I don't know. And I also think when you're reaching out to those ancestors, they're reaching back. I used to have dreams about like one of my great grandmothers. And I was like, who is this woman? And I had no idea until after I found my bio dad and some relatives, they sent me some photos. And I saw these photos of her and I was like, holy shit, we have the same face. But, she's like a mixed indigenous woman. And then her husband, my great grandfather, he's Black. And I'm just like looking at them and I'm like, okay, like you're the ones that have been reaching out. Now, if I had told anyone when I was younger, I'm having dreams about these people, I think they're my relatives, they would tell me I'm crazy. Mm-hmm. Or just the biology of intuition of being pulled. Like I used to have dreams of, and kind of an acute obsession with Japan and being pulled there. And I couldn't understand why. And then years, like, 2 decades later, I find out my biological father was stationed there for years and have a sister there. So I'm like, okay, internal GPS is pulling me
Yes.
to this place.
Yeah.
And that's my ancestors like, hey, we're over here. And I think the more we reach out, the more they reach back.
I agree. I love hearing about how you are balancing the analytical side and the creative side and the unknown, inspirational, intuitional, other being side, right? And I hear your process and how you're going between those things. The creativity is helping you get it out. You're listening to what you're hearing, but you're also reaching out, and then you're grounding it all in the physical world, in research, in going on ancestry websites or however you did that, tangible, like boots on the ground, fingers on the keyboard, drawing it on paper, making altars, like going between these three realms really, and how piecing that together just makes the picture so much fuller.
It's hard work to do it. And I think the other thing I want to tell people is I'm in a good place with it now. I've definitely gone batshit crazy at different points in my life, because there is that like element of going, oh my gosh, am I just schizophrenic? Am I just like losing my mind? Because that was the other thing in finding out through the history. Like I found out one of my grandmothers was institutionalized, and I'm like, for seeing things, and then like finding out at 42 that my grandmother was a tarot reader. The grandmother I didn't know her. I didn't grow up with her. I've talked to her once in my adult life now since finding that out. But like, there's this element where you do go a little bit bonkers for a while if you're not grounded. And that was one of the big things too, with when I had to get sober. Like I had to find sobriety because I was not like, I knew I was going to spin off the rails, because it's really hard to hold all that energy and find physical outlets or physical tangible ways to work with it and not feel like you're losing your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I too had to get sober and as we're talking about it, I don't know, tell me if you agree. I think that work of bringing it back to the physical world is how we stay sane and stay here and like figure out whether, I don't want to say we're okay or not, because that's not not exactly going to describe what's happening, but if we're on the right track or what we're doing is actually helping. And one of the hardest things I've found in spiritual work, metaphysical work, all of these worlds that are holding our tools, whether it's tarot, mediumship, astrology, all this stuff, they really struggle and lack grounding. They don't bring it back to this. So we don't have the tools. We are literally making them up as we go.
Yeah. No, definitely agree with that. And that's why we have to find also not giving over, like being in reverence, but not giving up your agency.
Yes.
That's the fine line too. I mean, you see people go into spiritual psychosis all the time, or they just like, it's like very pendulum swing, like it's all or nothing. And sometimes the all can be full on psychosis, because they're so disconnected from being connected to the physical, and we're physical beings, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to do when you're a liminal person, is to be in it's very painful to be in the physical world. I used to envy people, like even growing up, that like, people, I would try to fit in. I would try to be part of the pack. It would always fail. But because it just wasn't it wasn't natural for me to be like in a group all the time. And I don't think, and I also just like, don't think it's natural for me to be isolated all the time. But I just think there's not one way of being like, and I think that's the issue, is we're trying so hard to get people to stay in one zone of comfort.
Yep.
And I just don't think that's a luxury that some people, especially liminal people, when you come from all these different places, or you're, you know, living in and out of different realities, and they're very real. I had a friend once say to me a long time, she's like, not everything means something. And I just looked at her and I said, if not everything like didn't mean something, then I would have no reason for being here. So that's your reality, is that my reality is this, and they can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
One doesn't have to cancel the other out. So I don't know. I think it's important to remember that just because I'm existing doesn't mean you can't exist, and because you exist doesn't mean I can't exist. And I think that's a huge part of also the liminality.
Absolutely. It's like a mindset of that everything can be liminal. There are not fixed boundaries, right? Like it'd be so much easier, right? If there was one answer and one box we each fit in, and
Yeah.
everything.
Well, even
was
like
one.
I always looked at like my astrology chart, my human design, everything about my everything is like nothing is fixed. Everything's open and like I'm like I'm having to like hold on to things left and right. I need the physical, even though it's uncomfortable. I need the physical to brace myself. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. That's why I had to get sober, or I had to do this, because like it's very easy for me to check out,
Mm-hmm.
So it's a trip.
It is. And, using astrology language is kind of helpful because it helps me anyways remember that, yes, some of us are more fixed or less fixed than others. And that's what, it always blows my mind that people don't grapple with all this stuff. And there are humans, I think, apparently, that don't. and like, that's cool too. And, we're over here, trying to hold on for dear life. And, some people aren't, and that's like, all right, that's cool. Just let us do our thing over here, and hope we figure it out.
Right? Oh my goodness. Wow. I think the only thing fixed in my chart is my rising, and I'm like, like, and it's so weird. Like, I'm Aquarius rising, so I'm like, well, it's just weirdo central here, and like everything else is like really mutable. I know. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But even doing like the drawings, like I did I really wanted to put my own artwork, in the book. And even that was all of the drawings. I always hand illustrate everything, but the book was the first time I did everything in Procreate. So even that, I was like forcing myself to kind of go like, okay, like I was super anti doing digital drawing, but then for this book I was like, I feel like it's important for me to do something that connects these realities, but like in a new way. And I'm like, of course I'm going to try and learn how to, and I did, it's like learning how to write again. Learning a new language. Okay, let's try this new way of, and so that's why like it's very illustrative, and even that was like bringing together a new space for me, like artistically.
It's really beautiful. I was like, wow, I saw your cover and I was like, oh, I'm so jealous. That cover's amazing.
Oh, it's
so
funny.
beautiful.
I have like, they sent me like a test one kind of, it's what I love is that it's like the black ink is raised on it. And so that feels really nice. Like I like that it's got like a textile thing. But I was also really kind of pushy about, I wanted it to match like my other work, because I have a lot of like the red, black, and white. Like I wanted it to like look cohesively with, like, if you were to look at all of my work together, that it looked like it all belonged together, or it was related.
Yeah, so. I love that. Yeah, I hope a lot of you listening will find the book and buy a copy, and so you can hold it in your hands too and see the artwork in it and read these beautiful stories.
Thanks.
Let's wrap up and do that with, maybe you can just tell us where to find the book, where to find your work, and how to find you online and whatnot. Your classes sounds like you have.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is on sale everywhere as of February 11th, as we are launching this today. And you can definitely find it online through different resources, wherever you buy books, and at like some local bookstores and things like that. But marcellakroll.com is my website. And I have everything pretty much linked there if you're looking for classes, events, or in person. I definitely have a bunch of in-person book signing events coming up. I teach in-person classes and mentorship, also online. And I have my Instagram, which is just at Marcella Kroll. And those are like the best ways to keep up with me. I have a mailing list if you want to sign up for that. I know it's that forever dilemma of wanting to stay connected, but then also be detached from your phone. But those are the best ways to kind of follow up with what I'm doing here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing so much about your process and your work and yourself. And I really hope we get you to come visit Lilydale soon.
I really want to. I'd love that. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, everybody.